Hi, King Street kids. It's Kelly Burbage here with a story for you this week called Meet the Dullards. Now, have you ever said, "This is so boring," or "Ugh, this is dull"? Or have you ever heard someone say, "This is about as interesting as watching paint dry"? Well, this book, Meet the Dullards, introduces you to the family, the Dullards, Mr. Dullard, Mrs. Dullard, their 3 children, Blanda, Borley, and Little Dud. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Dullard have done everything to make sure their children lead a very dull and boring life. Now, they do let them read books, but only something like Cooking Without Flavor. And the children can play games like a family favorite, Monotony. Monotony is a synonym for dullness. Do you think that Mr. and Mrs. Dullard would ever let their children go to a circus? Never! But you'll see the children hear about a circus coming to town, and you'll see what happens. Be sure to be watching for those clues on the pages. By the way, this book, Meet the Dullards, this is the extra boring edition. One day, Mr. and Mrs. Dullard received quite a nasty surprise. The Dullards collected the books and handed their children some nice blank paper to read instead. Then they left the room to discuss the problem in private. This was not the first time their children had given them a shock. Last week, they had asked to go to school, and just the day before, Mr. Dullard had caught them trying to play outside. Mrs. Dullard shook her head sadly. "Where did we go wrong?" Now, Mr. Dullard comforted his wife. "It can't be our fault. We're perfectly dull. Perhaps it's this place. Last fall, remember? Some leaves turned color. And now this." He pointed to an upsetting commotion in the driveway. "There's never a dull moment." "You may be right. It's like a circus around here," Mrs. Dullard agreed. "This is no place to raise Blanda, Borley, and Little Dud." So the Dullards packed up their 3 dull children and all of their dull things and moved. And just as they brought the last box into their new home, a lady came to the door. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said. "I baked you an applesauce cake." "Please don't use exclamation marks around our children," said Mrs. Dullard. "Smooth or chunky applesauce?" asked Mr. Dullard. "Chunks are so unpredictable, so nerve-wracking." "I'm sorry," said the neighbor. "They were chunks." "Goodbye," said the Dullards, shutting the door. "Well, I never!" they heard the neighbor lady muttering as she carried her cake away. "Well, we never either," said Mr. Dullard. "That's how we keep our family so dull." "You children need to calm down after all that excitement," said Mrs. Dullard. "Go watch the television." Mr. and Mrs. Dullard finished unpacking all their dull things. "This place feels more boring already," said Mr. Dullard. But then on their way to the paint store, the Dullards spotted an ice cream stand. Mr. Dullard ordered their usual. "5 vanilla cones, please." "Hold the cones and extract the vanilla." "But all that would be left is plain ice cream," the clerk said. "Yes, that's correct," said Mr. Dullard. At the paint store, Mr. Dullard suggested a medium gray. Too risky, Mrs. Dullard decided. Gray is the color of highways, and highways could make the children think about going somewhere. How about beige? "Out of the question," said her husband. "Beige reminds me of clay. The children might think of that and," put his hand over his heart, "they might want to make something." In the end, they told the clerk to mix the gray paint and the beige paint together, and the new color was indeed perfectly dull, like oatmeal left in a pot. After they finished painting the room, Mr. and Mrs. Dullard tried not to look at the walls, but it was no use. They were completely mesmerized. All day long, the Dullards watched the paint dry. Finally, Mr. Dullard tore his gaze away. "I think," he began. Mrs. Dullard shook her head. "No thinking," she reminded her husband. "It sets a bad example for the children. And speaking of the children, where are they?" Can't imagine what came over them, Mr. Dullard said as he herded the children safely back inside. "Perhaps it's this new home. It's terribly exciting." "You might be right. It's like a circus around here," Mrs. Dullard agreed. "This is no place to raise Blanda, Borley, and Little Dud." So the Dullards packed up their 3 dull children and all their dull things, and moved back. That night, Mr. and Mrs. Dullard fell asleep, secure in the knowledge that their children were perfect bores. I hope you found this extra boring edition of Meet the Dullards to be a very boring story. So I have a couple of things that maybe you might want to do today. One, draw a picture of the most boring bedroom you can imagine. Or write a story about an extra boring birthday party. Think about the things that would not be at an extra boring birthday party. And if you like this book, you might like some other books by Sarah Pennypacker. She wrote the Clementine series, the Wayland series, a book called Pax, and a great book called The Summer of the Gypsy Moths. And I also would like to thank that little Carolina wren that was singing during this entire story. They seem to hang around our backyard a lot. Have a extra boring day. See you next time. Bye.